VSonic, the heart of your system.
Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are back with another custom Navi review. This time we are looking at MSI's RX 5700 XT Evoke OC. So the first thing you are going to notice about this card is undoubtedly the kind of all gold design. So I'm pretty sure this is done to coincide with AMD's 50th anniversary. We've already seen they released their own kind of blower style cooler. It's like an updated version of the reference design which had loads of gold accents. So I'm pretty sure this is just tying in with that theme, but it's definitely an eye-catching gold shroud. The Evoke OC is not just a pretty face, however, as it does have that dual axial fan cooler as well, so hopefully we can expect better temperatures and also acoustics versus the reference design. And it also has an 80 MHz factory overclock in regards to the rated game clock when compared to the reference card. So priced at £440 here in the UK, is the Evoke OC worth the extra cash over the reference design? If we kick things off with a look at the design, obviously we can't really talk about this card without touching on that gold colour scheme. And obviously this is kind of subjective, so you might like it, I might not like it, it really depends, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But the one thing I would say is MSI is potentially limiting themselves here, as I reckon unless you already have a very specific gold themed PC, the chances of the Evoke OC kind of working with your own colour scheme I reckon are probably quite slim. So either you really don't care about the aesthetics and you just want a fast card, in which case okay, but I do think if you're spending £440 on a graphics card, chances are you do care about the aesthetics of your PC. So the odds of this kind of gold card working with your own colour scheme I don't think are necessarily that high, but obviously guys, feel free to disagree with me. Let me know your comments on the overall colour of this card down in the comments below. Sticking with the shroud design for now, one definite plus point for MSI is the fact that the shroud itself is made almost entirely from metal. It's this kind of lovely anodized aluminium shroud. So compared to most other cards on the market, most custom cards will likely go with a plastic shroud to keep costs down, but MSI, like we said, has that aluminium shroud. It feels really premium in the hand, and while there's only a couple of plastic pieces on the card itself, those kind of grille sections both at the end and on the front side, by and large, it does feel really premium, so that is a definite plus point for the Evoke OC. We've also got those two fans to touch on as well. These are MSI's Torx 3.0 design, and while this is new for a kind of MSI AMD card, we have seen the Torx 3.0 fans on, you know, lots of MSI current gen Nvidia cards, so it's nothing necessarily that new. But each fan measures 90mm across, and there is a zero fan stop mode, so when the GPU core drops below 60 degrees, the fans do stop spinning. It is also worth briefly mentioning the dimensions of the Evoke OC. So by 2019 standards, it is, I would say, relatively small. It measures in at 254 by 129 by 51mm. So like I said, it's not very long, basically just 25 centimeters long, though it is a 2.5 slot thickness. So if you do have an ITX case or something like that, you may just want to double check that this can fit. As for the backplate, this is again more gold aluminium, so it fits very nicely in with the overall theme of the Evoke OC, and we can also see that it is a full length design, and interestingly there is no cutout behind the back of the GPU. So it's mostly plain. There is an MSI logo just at the end of the card, but it is actually worth pointing out with the Evoke OC that there's no RGB lighting anywhere on the card, so it's an entirely RGB free card. So some of you might love that, some of you might hate that, but either way, no RGB. Power connectors and also the display outputs now are identical to reference, so that means you need one 8-pin and one 6-pin PCIe power connectors for the Evoke OC, and then as for display outs, we get 3 display ports and 1 HDMI. If we open up the card now to look at the PCB, we can see that MSI has gone for a modified design. It is still based on reference, but it has been modified somewhat with those added solid state capacitors. But by and large, the main things we need to talk about are the 7-phase power delivery for the GPU, which is the same as reference, and so is the 2-phase power delivery for the memory as well. Speaking of memory, we can also see that these chips come from Micron, rated at 14 gigabits per second. And lastly, we can also see that 7nm Navi GPU right in the middle of the PCB. As for the heatsink design itself, I wouldn't say it's overly large. It's a single aluminium fin stack which generally looks pretty similar in overall size to the Sapphire RX 5700 that we reviewed last week, although the Evoke OC does use 4 nickel-plated copper heat pipes, each of which measures 6mm across. On top of that, there is also a nickel-plated copper contact plate for the GPU itself, and there is a separate cold plate as well for the VRAM chips, and then one much smaller cold plate just off to the side for the MOSFETs as well. That's it for the cooler design, and diving straight into our temperature testing, we can see things are really impressive with the Evoke OC. That's because the GPU core ran no hotter than 62 degrees under load, making it 18 degrees cooler than the reference design, and actually one of the coolest running custom cards on our chart. That is obviously a fantastic improvement over the reference design, which is really good to see, as that card does run pretty hot. But unfortunately, when we get into our acoustic testing, we can see the reason for such impressive thermal performance. Simply put, the fans have to run pretty fast, around the 64% fan speed mark, and that means acoustic levels reach almost 49 decibels. This is about 4 decibels cooler than the reference card, so it is quieter, but for me, a custom card at this price really should be significantly quieter than the reference card, and looking at the rest of the cards on our chart, this is definitely one of the loudest we have tested. So at £440, I think the noise levels for this card are definitely quite disappointing. It is worth saying that MSI has made a second silent BIOS available for users to download on their website, but this isn't how the card ships. It is something you're going to have to do yourself. It's not like there's actually a secondary BIOS function on the card itself, so if you do want that silent BIOS, you're going to have to download it yourself and flash it onto the card. So it's definitely not ideal in that instance, and also in my testing it really didn't make any difference. So the fan speed dropped from 64% to 62%, which made basically no meaningful difference to total noise levels whatsoever. So I think if MSI had gone with a dual onboard BIOS, then that would be a different story. Then we could definitely test further that silent BIOS, but at the moment you're going to have to download it and flash it yourself, which I think potentially isn't necessarily the best idea for inexperienced users, and then again, based on our testing, it really made no difference. So as it stands, the Evoke OC is definitely focused on its overall temperatures, and that does come at the expense of its noise levels. Moving on to power draw now, we did see the Evoke OC pull almost 15 watts more than the reference card, which pretty much puts it at standard RTX 2080 levels, and we can see that the reason for this increase in power draw would be down to clock speed. That's because under load, the Evoke OC is running about 100 MHz faster than the reference design, as we saw an average 1917 MHz under load. As for how much difference that actually makes in terms of gaming, we're going to put up our graphs now, but it is worth saying here we're going to focus on our 1440p charts. If you do want to look at 1080p and 4K results, we do have that data over on the main site, which is kitguru.net. If we go ahead and put up our 1440p charts, we can see that this extra 100 MHz or so does make a small difference for the Evoke OC, probably around 2 to 3 frames per second when gaming at 1440p. That means on average the Evoke OC is running 3% faster than the standard reference design. In some instances it did reach 4 or 5% faster, but overall on average 3% faster than the reference design. So, you know, I guess it's better than nothing, but it's certainly not a huge leap forward. Based on what we have seen though from other custom cards, I think that is probably going to be a similar story for most other future custom cards we test as well, as it seems that these Navi GPUs have pretty much been delivered right on the edge of their performance limits. As for how this added frequency changes the big picture, we can see that the Evoke OC comes in on average just 2% slower than Nvidia's RTX 2070 Super Founders Edition. It is worth saying though that with the kind of AMD versus Nvidia tests, those average performance numbers do hide quite a lot of performance variation. So in titles like Battlefield 5, the AMD cards really do pull ahead, but then again in other more like the DirectX 11 titles, we do see Nvidia cards pull further ahead as well. So 2% on average, but that does hide some pretty big performance variation. As just a final couple of comparisons now, versus the Radeon 7, we do see the Evoke OC coming in 4% slower, though this Evoke card is 13% faster on average than Nvidia's 2060 Super. By and large though, if you know how well a 5700 XT performs, the extra 3% or so that you get for the Evoke OC I don't think really changes that much, so like we said, if you know how well the 5700 XT performs, you're basically getting the same level of performance from the Evoke OC. If we move on to manual overclocking now, I can actually say that with the Evoke OC, I did get better results from overclocking than I have for any other Navi card I've tested in the past. So we were able to max out the 2150 MHz on the GPU core, and we could also max out the memory up to 950 MHz, which is kind of like the limit of the memory slider in AMD Wattman. This overclock actually saw our average clock speed under load go up by another 100 MHz or so, which is another 5% to our frequency, and that actually translated really well to our 1440p titles, where we saw overall performance increase by 5%, which was around 4 to 5 frames per second. This actually puts the Evoke OC almost 9% faster than the reference 5700 XT. The downside to that is that the fans did run even faster, from 64% stock up to 77% when manually overclocked, and that brings noise levels up to basically Vegas 64 levels. So manually overclocking the Evoke OC is certainly not a quiet experience. So then, wrapping up this review, I think by and large MSI's RX 5700 XT Evoke OC is a very solid card. It runs about 100 MHz faster than the reference design. We could actually overclock it as far as AMD's Wattman utility would allow, and it also does run very, very cool as well, with the GPU peaking at just 62 degrees. Obviously, the design is going to be subjective. Some of you might love the gold, some of you might hate it, but the main thing really holding this card back is definitely the noise levels. Running at almost 49 decibels, this is only 4 decibels quieter than the reference card, and considering this card is priced at £60 higher than the MSRP, £440 here in the UK, I think it is fair to say at that price premium we really would have expected a significantly quieter card versus the reference design, and we are simply not getting that with the Evoke OC. That is a definite shame, as in every other area the Evoke OC does do really, really well. It performs about 3% faster on average than the reference design. It does run very cool, and we are able to manually overclock it basically as far as Wattman would allow. But for anyone paying £60 over the MSRP, I really think the card should be quieter. So unless you really don't care about noise levels whatsoever, I think we are going to see significantly quieter options in the coming weeks. So guys, that is it for my review of MSI's RX 5700 XT Evoke OC. If you like this video, you can give us a thumbs up. Also leave a comment down below. Do let me know what you think of this card, particularly the design, and what do you think about the noise levels as well. Are you the kind of person who just doesn't care, or do you want a significantly quieter card versus the reference design? If you haven't subscribed already, please feel free to do so and hit that notification bell just to get a little notification every time a new video comes up. If you like this t-shirt I've been wearing, you can check out our merch store, which is linked down below. And lastly, if you would like to get some of our content early, as well as get access to some exclusive giveaways, you can consider backing us on Patreon. Until then though guys, I'm Dominic 4Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.